Okay, I wanted to welcome everybody back to the W100 build, which is basically our newest engine swap, which is the Cummins diesel. Last time you saw us, we pushed this bad boy right out the shop. We went ahead and purchased brand new leaf springs and also brand new Bilstein shocks. Reason we did that is that these shocks and these leaf springs are pretty well dead in the water. And especially with putting more weight to these, we definitely wanted to beef this up a little bit. It's 19 degrees right now. Actually, it might be 12 by now. I'm not sure. Took the engine hoist, kind of lifting up right where our engine mount will be at. So that kind of makes it easier for me to get these leaf springs kind of where they're at. I'm gonna support that front end with a jack, and I'm only gonna do one side at a time. That'll be leaf spring and shock at the same time. That way we don't have that much play, and that way our front end is still supported in two different ways. As far as I know right now, all we're gonna do is pull that plate and then pull the shock, pull these two bolts, pray that those eyelets are gonna be the same size as those eyelets right there, which they should be. South Dakota Truck Parts provided us with these leaf springs. No, not sponsored, but they did have these and they got them in a very quick manner. Would definitely recommend them. That first leaf spring is out, passenger side, so you can kind of tell the difference. These guys are pretty wore. Still got a couple pads on them. Usually these older ones, you will never have any pads left in between, but they're not awful. As you can see, we got a couple more stacked on this guy, so it's gonna be a much better source to put that big old heavy engine in. Just like usual, when you try to put something that's not meant to be in this vehicle, this is what happens. So these studs that are in this front end right here are not long enough to actually go through the hold down plate. I switched out the full front end from the 3/4 ton parts truck just because after doing research that Dana 44 would just not keep up with what we're kind of want to demand out of this truck. That's hooked up. We're gonna pray gear ratios are gonna be 353s and never been touched, which they should be. As you can see, I did not touch the rear end yet. We're gonna wait to do that until we can actually get it on the lift. Bad things that happened, this brake line broke. So I'm probably gonna want to either change that out now, or I guess I'm just gonna wait till later. We'll see. We wanna at least try to get this big boy in there somewhat close today, because that would be sweet. And then once that guy's mounted, then I can do my killer dowel pin. Look at that man go. She's in. The springs aren't even flexing that much. Wasn't that hard. Gonna have to lift her up a little bit and get those a little bit more positioned to better. I'd call that a freaking success. The transmission mount, the plate, I'd call it. All you gotta do is change that from the 318 or 360 version to the Cummins version. If you have a parts truck, that's very helpful. Make sure you grab that plate. If not, it sat right into those holes from the 318. So I didn't even have to cut those holes at all, divvy them out like some people are saying on the Ram Charger forums. If you're just tossing her in like that, that's just too easy almost. It was much easier than the Highboy, obviously because this truck is the same generation. And that, all the clearances are perfect, obviously, and we got all this all accomplished. Today we have a guest star. His name is AJ.
Ripping the merch.
Bang, 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 bang.
So Alex came out today and came to help, and so did he. So we've been kind of plugging away. We got the transfer case on, all three of us bench pressing it. We ended up getting it because the jack failed. And then Alex just proceeded to take the whole front off so I can go ahead and do the killer dowel pin. Once we get the killer dowel pin in, stick all that back on, basically, and then we're gonna be kind of ready to actually start probably assembling that front end. Once we get it so it's able to run and drive, we'll patch the floor because we've got a big gnarly hole in the floor to get the transfer case bolts. Took that 318 out. We're gonna leave that hole until we make sure that the transfer case that I redid functions correctly. I got the gas tank and fuel tank all buttoned up. Just got the lines just chilling right there. Getting ready to run those up to the return and the pump. Once that is, once those are plumbed in, good to go with the fuel system. Then basically, all we've got left is to run some drive shafts. I did check my transfer case that I rebuilt. It is going into all the different gears that we need it to, as well as we've got the column all buttoned up and it is shifting from park all the way down to low. So that's super good news. I gotta buy a new U-joint for the front drive shaft and a new U-joint for the back drive shaft.
All right, guys, welcome back to Daily Driven Death Traps. Today, we're gonna do our overview on our 1990 W100. So this has been a long project for us, and basically, if you haven't been here yet before and this is your first look at what we do on the channel, this is a 1990 W100 we got as a 318 automatic half-ton. So what we ended up doing is we pulled that motor and we put a 1990 12-valve Cummins in this with the automatic. Basically, we took the full 318, all running carriage and drivetrain and everything out of it, and stuck the whole 3/4 ton right underneath it. I'll show you what we got going here, right now, and then we'll go over kind of what we did to get to where we're at right now. Basically, as she sits right now, this is a 3/4 ton underneath and a half ton on the top. So yes, it's a short bed single cab. I did end up doing a bunch of research, did actually tons of measuring on the W100 chassis compared to the W250 chassis. And many articles I read said that these frames were almost identical in thickness and size, and I did go through and measure all that because at first we were going to have to plate the chassis, I thought, and we did not have to. Obviously, the way it is right now, she sits with the Cummins engine, did nothing really to that. Had to add a new water pump, had to add a new freeze plug, as well as a new fuel pump, and basically, other than that, the Cummins was ready to go. Then we stepped back, didn't do anything to the 727, but we did end up having to rebuild the NP205. That was my fault. I didn't look at it enough. The gentleman told me that the transfer case was bad, and actually it was just a bad U-joint. So I ended up rebuilding the whole NP205 kind of twice for no reason at all. At first we had a seal issue, because yours truly forgot to put one bolt in, so training fluid was leaking from the transmission into the transfer case. So that's rebuilt. Undercarriage wise, we have brand new front leaf springs because the W250 ones were basically a U. And then new shocks just because, step into the back, we did not really do anything. I just switched the decent shocks that were down there. They still had some spring rate to them, as well as the leaf springs. This thing does kind of ride like a Mack truck right now, just due to the fact that it's a short wheelbase with the big W250 leaf springs under it. So slightly a Mack truck, but you know, it's not bad, not terrible. Now, to get this engine in this truck was, you know, this is why we chose this. Last Cummins swap we did, it was a Ford pickup, the Cummins per se, the 73, and we had to buy different swap mounts and make our own transmission mount and do some odds and ends to it, which all in all wasn't hard. Cummins swaps in general are super simplistic and easy. The hard one for this was getting all of it to function with itself. So the way it is right now, basically 98% of the truck coincides with itself. It has the same cab harness as the 1990. This truck came completely gutted. So at first we started with that 318, and it was basically a plug and play for the cab. Now, some of the gauges are a little skewed when you go to turn it on, but it's not skewed enough to worry about. Otherwise, the hardest part of this swap was just the electronics wise. We took some time running through it, just because that Cummins donor truck we bought had a harness that was completely hacked up. One of the biggest challenges was that Cummins we bought was very dirty, very not well taken care of, super oily, had oil leaks for days, and it was all in all just more about cleanliness. We took longer probably cleaning the engine than we did setting the engine. So that being said, if you guys do this, make sure you pick a good donor. Now let's talk about the reason why we ended up with this Cummins swap, and that is due to the fact of the 318 that was in this truck originally as you recall, didn't have any issues. It was brand new basically. It probably had 25,000 miles, if that. I owned the truck when it wasn't painted and it was just had the motor in it. And it was a great motor, fantastic. So I got it back from one of my buddies, and the ECU was out of the truck for an extended amount of time, and somehow the pins in the ECU were bent. Now, Alex and I tried to do a 24-hour truck build with this, putting it back together and getting it back on the road. The only thing that stopped us from doing that was the two pins that were messed up. So I personally think that was part of the issue, but another part of the issue is the truck sat probably 2.5 years with the same fuel tank under it, and that motor was fuel injected / you had a throttle body on it and had fuel injectors. Those fuel injectors, I think, were clogged, thus our misfire, and sounded like the timing chain missed balance, which probably didn't. And we actually, that's the whole reason. We thought it jumped timing just because of that, but I think the injectors clogged, started running like crap, and we just gave up on it and said, you know what would be sweet? W250 under a W100. So, thus the Cummins was born. All in all, it was super easy swap. Budget-wise, let's just talk about that real quick. So the truck in general, we got back for $3,500. Do that what you may. The truck already had new body mounts, it came with all new rubbers, had the paint job on it that does work. It looks good from afar, as well as the truck was in pretty decent shape. Got it back for $3,500. Body, blah, blah, blah. If we wanted to, we could have sold that 318 and that automatic engine for a price that would have got us some money back on that. Probably could have got $1,500 out of those two items. Didn't sell it though. We're gonna have that for another project. Let's just say $3,500 because we kept the engine trans. Then we had to source a truck. This was this was like 2021. We bought this truck, the donor truck, and it was $4,500. Way overpaid for that. I would never recommend overpaying for a parts truck, especially. I was getting kind of desperate, and that's just how it ended up. It was a decent truck, and the motor is good. It runs great, so I can't complain too much, but it had its issues, and like I said, it was dirty. $4,500 turned out to be around $7,500. I guess 8 almost. So 8,000. Throw the rims and tires on there. You know, you don't really have to count those because someone, if they buy it, might change them up. I might keep them. You never know. But that was $1,000. So we got 9, and then all the minor parts for the Cummins. Not totally expensive, but time extensive. So probably throwing another $500 there. And then the leaf springs were about 1,000, and the shocks were not cheap by any means. So we're into this truck around 10, give or take. If you don't count the motor and trans, since we're gonna keep for another project, throw $1,500 out of that, we're under 10. So this is kind of an updated one from our previous video, budget Cummins build. This wasn't as budget as our last truck because slightly overpaid for the donor when well, I wouldn't say we overpaid for it, but we paid a significant amount for a roller per se. Around $10,000 we have into this truck, and this one is going to be for sale if you guys are interested in it, and it is going to be asking around 15. So it has some items that need cleaned up still. All in all, I think it's well worth it. It's a sweet little truck. It's a ton of fun to drive. So as you'll see in the next scene. So if you guys are looking to do a small block or even a big block from, let's say, the same year's trucks, so around, gosh, I almost forget the years, 73 all the way up to 92. So this generation of truck, I'll kind of step you through it really quick, just because I couldn't find a really good reference on what I had to do and what had to line up to do exactly what I was asking the internet to find me. I did find a guy that did this to a Ram Charger around the same years, and he did kind of have some valuable information, not really. Some of it was misleading and didn't really need to know that. So first starting out, my first question was that wiring harness I just talked about, and that wiring harness was not, well, it's plug and play to a point. So it doesn't really relay up to your sensors. I did have to play hell, well, I still haven't really tried, but play hell with getting that gauge cluster to kind of line up with the temperatures this motor produces compared to the 318. It seems like the sensors kind of have a different frequency to send to the dash. The one dash, the overall, the dash does function correctly. Just so things are skewed. And I know my Cummins engines, I know they don't overheat, so I'm not too worried on cooling, but that gauge says it's overheating all the time. It's not. The biggest thing you're gonna have to overcome, especially if you have a truck from earlier years, luckily they have all the same spot where the bulkhead connector goes. If you have a truck from, let's say, that 73, 74 era all the way up to that 89, you're gonna have to switch out your cab harness. And while you're doing it, I would almost recommend just switching out your dash. The dash in those eras it's cool, but I would say, I know this one's a little bit more plasticky, but it gives it more of a newer vibe. I would just switch those out completely. So find a good donor truck with a good dash, you'd have a better time switching everything out, all the same connectors, blah, blah, blah. Then you wanna move to your shifter linkage. Your shifter linkage plays a pretty key role. If you're gonna do a manual, this isn't for you, but your shifter linkage doesn't line up the best. It's similar linkage-wise, but you're gonna have to tool around with it. I'm still tooling around with this one, getting it so it doesn't have play in it. That's the hardest part. Then otherwise, like let's say your differentials, you technically don't have to switch those out. We didn't have to switch those out, but I wanted to just because why not do it? Why not have the Dana 60? Why not have the good items underneath the truck so you don't have to worry about it later? Don't keep the half-ton stuff. If you're doing two-wheel drive, again, this isn't for you, but a four-wheel drive, these axles bolt right up, no issue, as well as the power steering lines bolt right up. The vacuum is a little bit of an issue. The vacuum doesn't pull as hard, so the brake booster have a little bit of issues, but it still does braking activities. All the mounts underneath are very similar. You will need to keep your transmission mount. You could use the half-ton one. You just have to throw your new plate up top. So keep that plate from the top one on your parts truck, or if you find one, just order a new one. Motor mounts line up perfect. We had no issue there. You just have to buy, I definitely recommend switching to the new motor mounts due to the fact of this is a heavy engine and it takes a toll on motor mounts. Otherwise, we did have to go with the new drive shafts just due to the fact this is a shorter truck. Didn't really need the new front drive shaft, but I wanted the new one because that was what was wrong with the truck. I had to go ahead and have that new one in the back made just because the truck's shorter. So you might not have to do that if you're switching to the long bed, to a long bed, blah, 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 you'd be fine. This was a very straightforward swap. If you're finding an engine, I would totally recommend getting an intercooled engine rather than our non-intercooled. Yours kind of give or take there. It's up to you. This one's super simple. You don't have to worry about intercooler pipes. And I really didn't have to do much to the header panel. So if you don't have to have the intercooler, nah, don't worry about it. But if you find a donor truck, has the intercooler and everything, you're just gonna have to switch out that, gosh, I can't think, the header panel. I'm just gonna keep calling it radiator support. You're gonna have to switch out the radiator support, as well as I changed the radiator support in this truck to the later style radiator because the brass one we got for the parts truck was trash. So this does have aluminum radiator from a 91 to 93. Totally recommend that. You're just gonna have to get a little curly-do bend radiator pipe. Super easy to build if you're intelligent whatsoever. Totally recommend just throwing the better radiator in it. Never have to worry about cooling then, and your clutch fan is gonna, sit perfect. If you're doing this directly from truck to truck, feel free to message us. This was not a hard swap, but it does, you're gonna scratch your head once in a while and be like, oh, well, that's not gonna line up exactly perfect. But this, like I said, did line up a lot better than I first expected. Just took some time getting everything to set on from the parts truck.